Here's something they don't teach you in business school. The most devastating betrayals in professional environments don't come from enemies, they come from the people you've mentored, protected and trusted with your knowledge. While everyone talks about office politics and competition, nobody prepares you for the moment when your own generosity becomes the weapon used against you. The workplace that once felt like a second home suddenly reveals itself as a stage where loyalty is a performance and trust is just another commodity to be traded for advancement. I'm about to share with you 7 stories that will fundamentally change how you navigate professional relationships. These aren't tales of dramatic confrontations or obvious villains. They're accounts of the subtle, systematic ways that dedicated professionals get erased from their own success stories. You'll recognize yourself in these experiences because this kind of betrayal is happening in offices around the world every single day. The patterns are so common, so predictable, that once you learn to spot them, you'll wonder how you ever missed the warning signs. But here's the paradox that makes this content so valuable. The very qualities that make you vulnerable to workplace betrayal, generosity, loyalty, dedication, trust, are also the qualities that make you an exceptional professional. The solution isn't to become cynical or self-protective. It's to become strategically aware of how your strengths can be weaponized against you, and how to maintain your integrity while protecting your interests. By the time we finish this journey together, you'll have a completely different understanding of professional relationships, one that will serve you for the rest of your career. You know, there's something almost sacred about those first moments, when someone new walks into your professional environment. I remember it like it was yesterday, the way he stood there, uncertain, clutching his welcome packet like a lifeline. From that very first second, I felt this deep sense of responsibility, this instinct to protect and guide. It's funny how trust can bloom so quickly in the workplace, isn't it? I showed him every corner of that office, patiently answered his repeated questions, and yes, I covered his mistakes without saying a word. That's what mentors do, right? We nurture, we shield, we believe in potential even when it's not yet proven. The beauty of those early days was in the small gestures, the way I'd catch his eye during meetings and give him an encouraging nod, how I'd subtly redirect conversations when he seemed lost. There's a particular kind of satisfaction in watching someone gain confidence under your wing. I'd see him relax a little more each day, his shoulders less tense, his smile more genuine. The professional environment became less intimidating for him because I made it my mission to create that sense of security. But here's what I didn't realize then. Loyalty isn't always reciprocal, and sometimes the very trust we build becomes the foundation for our own disappointment. What strikes me most about this period is how naturally I fell into the role of protector. When he sent that poorly formatted email to the entire team, I quietly walked him through the proper protocols. When his first presentation had glaring errors, I stayed late to help him fix it before the morning meeting. This wasn't just about being helpful. It was about believing in someone's potential and investing in their success. The frustration would come later, but in those initial weeks, everything felt pure and purposeful. Little did I know that this very dedication would become the backdrop for a lesson about human nature that would change how I approach professional relationships forever. The coffee breaks were where our bond really solidified. During that first interval, he looked completely lost, sitting alone while everyone else chatted in their established groups. I couldn't just watch him struggle, so I sat down beside him, asked about his background, shared insights about our workplace culture. When he laughed at my gentle observations about our quirky office dynamics, I felt that warm satisfaction that comes from helping someone find their footing. He looked genuinely grateful, even relieved, and said something that would stick with me. "I'm so lucky to have you as support." Those words felt like a promise, a foundation for what I thought would be a lasting professional partnership. By the second week, something beautiful had developed. He started calling me his mentor, and I have to admit, there was a certain pride in that title. It felt like recognition of the investment I was making in his growth. The way he'd seek me out for advice, the respect in his voice when he asked for guidance, it all reinforced this notion that I was building something meaningful. The learning process became a shared journey, and I found myself genuinely invested in his success. But here's what I've learned about human nature. Sometimes the very people we nurture most carefully are the ones who'll surprise us with their capacity for ingratitude. The pattern of protection became almost instinctive. When he made that crucial error in the quarterly report, I spotted it just in time and corrected it before our supervisor could see. When his spreadsheet calculations were off by thousands, I quietly fixed the numbers and never mentioned it. I told myself this was what good colleagues do. We support each other. We cover for each other during the learning curve. The environment of trust I was creating felt noble, purposeful. I was building someone up, helping them establish credibility in a competitive workplace. What I didn't anticipate was how this very protection would eventually become invisible to him. How my quiet fixes would be forgotten, while his polished final products would be remembered. Those late nights became a routine I almost cherished. He'd leave at 5 sharp, but I'd stay, meticulously reviewing his work, catching the details he'd missed, ensuring everything was perfect before the next day. There was something almost meditative about those quiet hours in the office, fine-tuning his reports, double-checking his calculations. I never told anyone about these sessions. They felt like a gift I was giving, investment in someone's future. The dedication came from a place of genuine care, but also from this belief that hard work and loyalty would eventually be recognized and valued. As I'd finally turn off my computer around 8 or 9, I'd feel this sense of accomplishment, this quiet satisfaction of having made a difference. If only I'd known that this very selflessness would become the foundation for one of the most painful lessons about workplace dynamics I'd ever experienced. The shift happened so gradually that I almost missed it at first. One week he was the newcomer asking basic questions, and the next, he was being invited to meetings I'd never attended despite my years at the company. There's something deeply unsettling about watching someone leap over the invisible barriers that took you years to even recognize existed. The professional environment I thought I understood suddenly revealed new layers, new hierarchies that apparently had nothing to do with experience or dedication. It was like discovering a secret room in a house you'd lived in for decades. The trust I'd placed in the system, in the belief that hard work and loyalty would be recognized, began to crack in ways I couldn't quite articulate yet. The moment that really crystallized this shift was during a team presentation. He repeated a suggestion I'd made to him the previous day, word for word, actually, and our supervisor's response was immediate and telling. "That's strategic thinking," he said, with a tone of genuine admiration I'd rarely heard directed at anyone. The frustration wasn't just about the stolen idea. It was about the realization that the same thought, coming from him, carried weight mine never had. The environment suddenly felt charged with an energy I didn't recognize, where familiarity and fresh perspectives seemed to matter more than proven track records. Nobody mentioned that the strategy wasn't originally his. And in that moment, I understood something profound about how visibility works in professional settings. Then came the email that changed everything. The HR department informed me that I'd been assigned a new role, supporting his development. The language was careful, professional, but I could read between the lines. What had once been my independent responsibilities were now framed as support functions. The learning curve I'd helped him navigate was apparently over, and somehow I'd become the one who needed repositioning. This wasn't just about hierarchy. It was about being systematically rendered invisible, while appearing to be given more responsibility. The disappointment wasn't just personal. It was a fundamental questioning of everything I thought I knew about how merit and recognition worked in that place. The exclusion became more obvious as weeks passed. That Friday lunch where he dined with the supervisor and 2 directors, I only knew about it because I saw the photos on social media later. There I was, eating my packed lunch in the break room, while he was apparently discussing strategic initiatives over wine and appetizers. The environment I'd once felt comfortable in started to feel foreign, like I was watching a play where everyone knew their lines except me. The trust between colleagues that I'd always taken for granted began to feel naive, almost foolish. How many similar lunches had happened before? How many conversations about the future had occurred without my input? despite my years of contribution. What hurt most was the subtle change in how our supervisor addressed us. I'd been used to being called his right hand, someone integral to operations. But gradually, the language shifted. I became the person who handled the foundation, while he was the one who brought innovation. The professional vocabulary itself became a tool of diminishment. These weren't dramatic confrontations or obvious slights. They were quiet erosions of status, so gradual that questioning them would have seemed paranoid. The learning process that had once felt collaborative now felt like a careful redistribution of value, where my contributions were being recontextualized as maintenance, while his were framed as transformation. The most devastating part was how natural it all seemed to everyone else. Colleagues who'd once sought my input started directing their questions to him. The professional dynamics I'd spent years building were quietly being transferred to someone who'd been there mere weeks. There was no announcement, no formal restructuring, just a gradual shift in attention and respect. The environment that had once validated my expertise now seemed to view me as part of the old guard, someone whose knowledge was useful but not exciting. The trust I'd placed in institutional memory, in the value of experience, was being systematically challenged by the allure of fresh perspectives and new energy. As I watched this transformation unfold, I realized I was witnessing something fundamental about workplace dynamics. Merit and recognition aren't just about what you know or how hard you work. They're about timing, presentation, and sometimes just being the right person at the right moment. The dedication I'd shown in mentoring him, the loyalty I'd demonstrated through years of service, seemed to count for less than his ability to articulate ideas with confidence and charm. The professional environment I'd trusted to reward consistent performance was revealing itself to be much more complex, much more arbitrary than I'd ever imagined. And this realization would soon lead to an even more painful discovery about how quickly everything can change when you're not the one in favor. 4 days. Let me say that again. 4 days after his arrival, the announcement came through the company-wide messaging system. He would be the new project coordinator. I found out the same way everyone else did, through a generic notification that popped up on my screen while I was finishing a report I'd been working on for months. The professional environment I'd navigated for over a decade suddenly felt like foreign territory. There's something uniquely devastating about discovering that your years of dedication can be overshadowed in less than a week. The trust I'd placed in the system, in the belief that consistency and reliability would eventually be rewarded, crumbled in the time it took to read a single paragraph. I must have read that message 3 times before it truly sank in. John will be our new project coordinator. That was it. No mention of the transition process. No acknowledgement of who had been handling those responsibilities. No recognition of the institutional knowledge that would be lost. The disappointment wasn't just about being passed over. It was about being erased from the narrative entirely. Years of late nights, successful project completions, and client relationships were reduced to nothing in a single announcement. The learning I'd accumulated, the trust I'd built with vendors and stakeholders, simply became invisible background noise to someone else's sudden ascension. The next morning brought an encounter that crystallized just how completely things had changed. I passed our supervisor in the hallway, the same person who'd praised my strategic thinking countless times, who'd relied on my expertise during crisis situations, who'd called me indispensable just weeks before. He barely acknowledged me, just a quick nod as he hurried past, like I was any other employee. The environment that had once felt collaborative and respectful now felt cold and transactional. The professional relationships I'd spent years cultivating seemed to have evaporated overnight. It was as if my contributions had been written in pencil, easily erased when something more appealing came along. Then came his acceptance speech, brief, confident, and utterly devoid of any acknowledgement of the help he'd received. "I'm excited for this opportunity to contribute with my vision," he said, looking directly at the team I'd been supporting for years. Not a word about mentorship, guidance, or the foundation that had been laid for his success. The frustration wasn't just about recognition, it was about witnessing someone rewrite history in real time. The professional environment that had once valued collaboration was revealing itself to be more about individual positioning than collective achievement. My role in his development had become inconvenient to his narrative of natural leadership. The most painful part was watching how quickly the team's perception of me shifted. Before the promotion, colleagues sought my input on complex issues, trusted my judgment on difficult decisions. After the announcement, I became support staff in their eyes. The same people who'd valued my expertise now looked at me with that particular kind of workplace pity reserved for those who've been quietly demoted. The environment that had once reinforced my professional identity was systematically dismantling it. The trust between colleagues that I'd taken for granted revealed itself to be conditional, temporary, and ultimately fragile. What struck me most was the efficiency of it all. No dramatic confrontations, no heated discussions, just a quiet reorganization that left me feeling like a relic of a previous era. The professional dynamics I'd understood and operated within for years were suddenly foreign. My experience became traditional thinking, while his fresh perspective was innovative leadership. The learning curve I'd helped him navigate was forgotten, replaced by a narrative of natural talent and strategic vision. The workplace that had once felt like a second home now felt like a theater where I'd forgotten my lines. As I sat at my desk that first day after the announcement, I realized I was experiencing something that happens to countless professionals, but rarely gets discussed openly. The slow, methodical process of being made invisible while remaining physically present. The environment around me buzzed with excitement about new directions and fresh leadership, while I grappled with the reality that my years of dedication had been reduced to a footnote in someone else's success story. The trust I placed in meritocracy, in the idea that good work would speak for itself, was being systematically dismantled. And this painful realization was just the beginning of what would become an even more devastating lesson about how quickly professional relationships can shift when power dynamics change. The summons came through email, a formal invitation to discuss organizational restructuring with both the supervisor and HR representative. I actually felt a flicker of hope reading it. Finally, I thought, someone wants to hear my perspective, to understand what I bring to this team. There's something almost naive about how we interpret these corporate rituals, isn't there? We want to believe that our voice matters, that our years of contribution have earned us a seat at the table. I walked into that conference room with my shoulders straight, ready to advocate for my value, to remind them of everything I'd accomplished. The professional environment I'd trusted for so long surely wouldn't discard me without at least a conversation, right? They had prepared a printed document, new organizational structure, emblazoned across the top in that sterile corporate font that makes everything sound inevitable. My eyes scanned down to find my name, and there it was, internal support analyst. The disappointment hit me like a physical blow, not just the demotion, but the clinical precision of it. Years of leadership, client relationships, and strategic contributions reduced to support functions. The trust I'd placed in the system, in the belief that competence and dedication would be protected, crumbled as I stared at that piece of paper. The professional environment that had once felt like home was revealing itself to be just another corporate machine, grinding through human resources with calculated efficiency. Then came the phrase that still echoes in my mind whenever I think about workplace betrayal. We need people with a more current profile for leadership roles. He said it while looking out the window, unable to meet my eyes. The frustration wasn't just about the obvious age discrimination. It was about the cowardice of it. After 12 years of relying on my expertise, of praising my reliability, of calling me indispensable, they were discarding me with corporate euphemisms. The learning I'd accumulated, the institutional memory I carried, was suddenly outdated in the face of someone with a fresh perspective. The environment that had once valued experience was now treating it as a liability. The HR representative kept using words like repositioning and strategic realignment, but her discomfort was palpable. She couldn't hide the fact that she was participating in something that felt fundamentally wrong. There's something particularly devastating about watching Someone struggled to justify an injustice they clearly don't believe in. The professional protocols she was following couldn't mask the human reality of what was happening. The trust between employer and employee, the implicit contract that hard work and loyalty would be rewarded, was being systematically violated with bureaucratic language and procedural politeness. What made it worse was the absence of any acknowledgement of my contributions. Not once did they mention the successful projects I'd led, the crises I'd helped navigate, the relationships I'd built that had directly contributed to our team's success. The professional environment that had once celebrated my achievements was now treating my history as irrelevant. The disappointment wasn't just personal. It was about realizing that all those years of dedication had been reduced to line items in a restructuring document. My value as a colleague, as a strategic contributor, as someone who'd helped build the very foundation they were now dismantling, simply didn't factor into their calculations. As they outlined my new, diminished role, I felt something inside me shift. The respect I'd had for leadership, for the corporate structure, for the idea that doing good work would protect you, it all began to crumble. The environment that had once felt collaborative was revealing itself to be transactional, where loyalty was expected but never reciprocated. The trust I'd placed in institutional fairness was being systematically demolished by people who couldn't even maintain eye contact while they destroyed my career trajectory. The learning process I was experiencing wasn't about professional development. It was about understanding how quickly everything you've built can be swept away by someone else's convenience. After they left, I sat alone in that conference room for several minutes, staring at the document that had just redefined my professional worth. The silence was deafening. The same space where I'd presented successful project outcomes, where I'd contributed to strategic planning sessions, where I'd been recognized for my expertise, had just become the site of my professional diminishment. The workplace that had once felt like a second home now felt like a stage where I'd been relegated to a background role in someone else's success story. The trust I'd placed in the system, in the belief that competence and dedication would be protected, lay in ruins around me. And this devastating realization would soon lead to a decision that would surprise everyone, including myself. 3 weeks after that devastating meeting, I made a decision that surprised even me. I submitted my resignation letter on a quiet Tuesday morning, without fanfare, without dramatic speeches, without burning any bridges. There's something profoundly liberating about choosing your own ending when others have already written you off. The professional environment that had once defined my identity was about to lose the very person who'd held it together for over a decade. But here's what struck me most. My departure would be as invisible as my contributions had become. No farewell party, no company-wide email, no acknowledgement of the institutional knowledge walking out the door. Just a quiet exit from a place that had already forgotten my value. The last time I looked at my desk, I felt this strange mixture of grief and relief. 12 years of my life was scattered across that workspace. The coffee mug I'd bought during our team retreat. The notebook filled with meeting notes and strategic insights. The small plant I'd nurtured through countless late nights. Everything fit into a single shopping bag, which somehow felt like a metaphor for how easily a professional legacy can be erased. The trust I'd placed in that physical space, in the idea that consistency and presence would eventually be rewarded, was being packed away in minutes. The environment that had once felt permanent was revealing itself to be as temporary as everything else in the corporate world. What hurt most was the silence from him, the person I'd mentored, guided, and protected during his crucial first weeks. I kept checking my phone, expecting some acknowledgement, some brief message of gratitude, or even a simple "thank you for everything I'd done," but nothing came. The professional relationship I'd invested so much in, the trust I'd extended so generously, had apparently meant nothing once my usefulness expired. The learning process I'd facilitated for him was forgotten, replaced by his new narrative of natural leadership and strategic vision. The disappointment wasn't just about recognition. It was about understanding how quickly human connections can be discarded when they're no longer convenient. The reactions from colleagues were telling in their restraint. Some avoided eye contact entirely. Others offered those awkward half-waves from across the office. There was a palpable discomfort, as if my departure was an inconvenient reminder of how precarious everyone's position really was. The professional environment that had once felt like a community was revealing itself to be a collection of individuals, more concerned with their own survival than with supporting a colleague in transition. The trust between coworkers that I'd taken for granted was shown to be conditional, temporary, and ultimately self-serving. My exit had become an uncomfortable truth that everyone preferred to ignore. Walking through the office for the last time felt like moving through a museum of my own career. Every conference room held memories of presentations I'd given, decisions I'd influenced, problems I'd solved. The frustration wasn't just about leaving. It was about watching an entire chapter of my professional life become instantly irrelevant. The environment that had once validated my expertise was now treating my departure as a mere administrative adjustment. The learning I'd accumulated, the relationships I'd built, the trust I'd earned, all of it was being reduced to a brief announcement that someone would be transitioning to new opportunities. That final elevator ride down was perhaps the most symbolic moment of the entire experience. Each floor that passed represented another layer of professional identity falling away. The loyalty I'd shown, the dedication I'd demonstrated, the late nights I'd worked, all of it was being left behind in a building that would function exactly the same without me. The professional environment I'd helped build and maintain was about to discover what happens when you discard the very people who understood its foundations. As the elevator reached the ground floor, I realized I was experiencing something that countless professionals endure but rarely discuss: the quiet dignity of walking away from a place that no longer deserves your presence. The drive home was when the tears finally came. Not dramatic sobs, just quiet streams of grief for everything I'd invested and lost. The trust I'd placed in the system, in the belief that hard work and loyalty would be protected, was being mourned in the privacy of my car. The professional relationships I'd valued were being redefined by their absence. But underneath the sadness, there was something else growing, a sense of self-respect that had been dormant for too long. The environment that had diminished my worth was now in my rearview mirror, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was moving towards something better, rather than away from something broken. This realization would soon become the foundation for a completely different understanding of professional relationships and personal worth. The pain of leaving a place where you've given everything runs deeper than most people realize. It's not just about losing a job. It's about losing a piece of your identity that you'd carefully constructed over years of dedication and trust. I didn't post anything on social media, didn't share dramatic stories with friends, didn't seek sympathy or validation. I simply disappeared from the daily routine of dozens of people. And the silence that followed was both devastating and enlightening. The professional environment that had once structured my entire life was suddenly absent, leaving me to confront who I was without that external validation. The learning process I was about to undergo would be far more valuable than any corporate training I'd ever received. Those first mornings were the hardest. My body would wake up at 6 a.m., ready for the commute, the coffee, the familiar rhythm of office life. But instead of rushing to get dressed, I'd lie there listening to the silence, feeling this strange mixture of loss and liberation. The trust I'd placed in routine, in the security of having somewhere important to be, was gone. The environment that had once given my days structure and purpose was no longer there to catch me. The disappointment wasn't just about career trajectory. It was about rediscovering what mattered to me beyond the external validation of professional success. Those quiet mornings became a forced meditation on self-worth and purpose. The self-doubt crept in gradually, then all at once. I started questioning everything: my judgment, my skills, my value as a professional. Was I really as competent as I'd believed? Had I been deluding myself about my contributions all these years? The frustration wasn't just about what had happened. It was about the erosion of confidence that follows any major professional setback. The learning process I was experiencing involved stripping away years of accumulated certainties and starting over with fundamental questions about my worth. The professional environment that had once reinforced my competence was gone, leaving me to rebuild my self-image from scratch. Thank goodness for real friends who know how to listen without trying to fix everything. I called an old colleague who'd left the company years earlier, and she did something beautiful. She just listened. No advice, no platitudes, no attempts to minimize what I was experiencing. When I finished telling her everything, she simply said, "They didn't know who they were losing, but you do." Those words hit me harder than all the corporate restructuring documents combined. The trust I'd lost in institutional fairness was being replaced by something more valuable. Trust in my own assessment of my worth. The environment that had diminished me was being counterbalanced by genuine human connection and authentic recognition. That conversation sparked something crucial in my recovery process. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror one morning and made promises to myself that would fundamentally change how I approached professional relationships. Never again would I train someone in isolation, absorbing all the risk while they gained all the credit. Never again would I cover for others' mistakes without documentation or acknowledgement. Never again would I remain silent about my contributions to avoid seeming boastful or demanding. The professional environment that had taught me to be invisible had inadvertently taught me the importance of visibility. The learning I was experiencing involved unlearning years of self-diminishing behaviors. The nights were when the real processing happened. I'd replay conversations, analyze decisions, try to understand how I'd allowed myself to become so invested in an environment that valued me so little. But gradually, the analysis shifted from self-blame to self-preservation. I began to see patterns I'd ignored, warning signs I'd dismissed, red flags I'd rationalized away. The trust I'd extended so freely wasn't necessarily wrong, but my expectation that it would be reciprocated had been naive. The professional relationships I'd valued had been more transactional than I'd realized, and accepting that truth was both painful and liberating. As weeks turned into months, something unexpected began to happen. The confidence that had been shaken by corporate politics started rebuilding itself on a more solid foundation. Instead of external validation, I was developing internal standards. Instead of seeking approval from people who'd proven untrustworthy, I was learning to trust my own judgment about my worth. The environment that had once defined me was being replaced by a clearer understanding of who I was independent of any workplace dynamics. The frustration and disappointment were gradually transforming into something more powerful, a determination to never again allow others to determine my professional value. And this transformation would soon lead to insights that would fundamentally change how I approached every future workplace relationship. This story still carries weight in my heart, but it's a different kind of weight now. Not the crushing burden of betrayal and disappointment, but the substantial weight of wisdom earned through pain. The professional environment that once seemed so important, so defining, revealed itself to be just one chapter in a much larger story about self-worth and resilience. What I initially experienced as devastating rejection has transformed into invaluable education about human nature and workplace dynamics. The trust I'd placed in external validation was replaced by something far more reliable: trust in my own assessment of my value. The learning that emerged from this experience became more valuable than any promotion or recognition I'd ever received. Here's what I understand now that I couldn't see then. I was never invisible. They simply lacked the capacity to recognize what they had. The professional environment that failed to value my contributions wasn't a reflection of my worth. It was a revelation of their limitations. Years of dedication, institutional knowledge, and strategic thinking don't disappear just because someone fails to acknowledge them. The frustration I felt about being overlooked was based on the mistaken belief that others' recognition was necessary to validate my competence. The disappointment came from expecting people to see what they were incapable of appreciating. My absence didn't become small. Their vision was simply too narrow to encompass it. There's a particular kind of strength in choosing silence over spectacle, in walking away with dignity rather than demanding justice. I didn't create drama, didn't seek revenge, didn't try to expose their poor judgment to others. I simply removed myself from an environment that no longer deserved my presence. The professional dynamics that had become toxic were left behind without ceremony or confrontation. This restraint wasn't weakness. It was recognizing that some battles aren't worth fighting because the opponents lack the character to understand what they're fighting against. The trust I placed in institutional fairness was redirected toward personal integrity, and that shift made all the difference. For anyone experiencing something similar, let me share this crucial insight. Don't wait for applause from people who only know how to appreciate noise over substance. The professional environments that overlook quiet competence in favor of flashy newcomers reveal more about their own superficiality than about your value. The loyalty you've shown, the dedication you've demonstrated, the expertise you've developed, these things have intrinsic worth that exists independent of others' recognition. The learning you've accumulated through years of experience doesn't become obsolete just because someone younger arrives with fresh energy and political savvy. Your professional story doesn't end because one chapter concluded disappointingly. The transformation I experienced changed my relationship with workplace dynamics permanently. I no longer seek gratitude from people whose values don't align with mine. I don't expect recognition from environments that confuse visibility with value. The professional relationships I build now are based on mutual respect and clear boundaries, not on the naive hope that dedication alone will ensure fair treatment. The trust I extend is measured and reciprocal, not the unlimited gift I once offered so freely. The environment I choose to work in must demonstrate that it values substance over style, consistency over novelty, and character over charm. What sustains me now is something far more reliable than external validation. It's genuine self-respect earned through surviving and learning from betrayal. The confidence I possess today is built on understanding my own worth rather than hoping others will recognize it. The professional environments I navigate are approached with wisdom rather than blind trust. The relationships I invest in are chosen more carefully, with attention to character rather than charm. The frustration and disappointment that once consumed me have been transformed into protective instincts that serve me well. I continue forward with less faith in people's gratitude, but with unshakable faith in my own capabilities. The most profound realization from this entire experience is that being discarded by the wrong people is actually a form of protection. The environment that failed to value me was doing me a favor by revealing its true nature before I invested even more of myself in it. The professional relationships that proved to be superficial were clearing space for more authentic connections. The trust I'd placed in institutional loyalty was redirected toward personal standards and boundaries. The learning that emerged from this painful chapter equipped me with insights that have served me in every subsequent professional situation. Sometimes the greatest gift is discovering who and what doesn't deserve your energy, your dedication, or your trust. And that understanding, while painful to acquire, becomes the foundation for building a much stronger and more fulfilling professional life. Now that you've witnessed these 7 profound stories of workplace betrayal and transformation, I want you to pause and ask yourself some hard questions. Which of these patterns do you recognize in your own professional life? Are you currently investing your trust and energy in people who see your dedication as weakness rather than strength? More importantly, are you waiting for recognition from an environment that has already shown you how little it values genuine contribution over political maneuvering? The most dangerous trap in professional relationships isn't the dramatic betrayal. It's the slow erosion of your self-worth while you wait for others to recognize your value. Every day you spend hoping that loyalty will be reciprocated by people who've already shown their character is a day stolen from building relationships with those who actually deserve your investment. The question isn't whether you'll face workplace betrayal. The question is whether you'll learn from it or repeat the same patterns in new environments. Here's what I want you to do right now. Identify one professional relationship where you're giving more than you're receiving, where your contributions are being minimized or overlooked, where your trust is being taken for granted. What would change if you started protecting your energy and expertise as carefully as you protect your most valuable possessions? What boundaries do you need to establish? What documentation do you need to create? What conversations do you need to have? The workplace dynamics that seemed so mysterious before these stories should now feel completely transparent. You have the knowledge to spot the warning signs, the wisdom to protect your interests, and the confidence to walk away from environments that don't deserve you. But knowledge without action is just entertainment. The real transformation happens when you start applying these insights to your own professional life. If this content has opened your eyes to patterns you've been ignoring, if these stories have helped you understand your own experiences better, if you're ready to approach workplace relationships with both wisdom and integrity, then I want you to subscribe to this channel and activate notifications. Because this is just the beginning of our conversation about navigating professional relationships with intelligence, self-respect, and strategic awareness. Your career deserves better than blind trust and naive loyalty, and I'm here to help you build something stronger,